Tynan, and I work at Leysen American School in Switzerland, and this is a recording of my Global EdFest presentation on experiential approaches in the social studies classroom. Topics for this talk, I'll just go quickly through what I mean by experiential approaches, why I believe in them, give a few different examples of how I've integrated them, and then just some closing thoughts. Simply put, experiential learning is learning by doing and doing things that are atypical for the classroom. I mean, discussions, reading, writing, taking notes, that is all doing something, but I mean a bit more of a kinesthetic and active approach in the classroom. I believe strongly about this approach because these are the sort of lessons that I remember from my time as a student. I also spent a number of years as an outdoor educator, which is predominantly experiential learning out in the field. We did an internal reflection survey as part of a just small professional learning community task where, as a history teacher, I asked colleagues in other departments what they remembered from their high school history and social studies classes. And it was twofold. Of course, they remembered their teachers and who their teachers were as people, but when it came to lessons, it was these more active lessons. And then one of the things that I think is most beneficial for teachers is that student recall is much quicker if you can refer to an experience rather than a lesson or a lecture amidst all of the things that students need to do. I mean, they have to shift gears so many times throughout the day, and lessons through units build on previous knowledge. And if you can refer to experience as touchstones, then students generally recall much quicker, and you can continue building on what you've done. So let me give you a few examples. The first example is using Duplo Legos, and with a variation with snow, and then the second is role playing. And the topic for this first, excuse me, the topic for this first lesson was the fall of the walls of Constantinople in 1453. And so here you see students building walls out of Duplo Legos, and here you see them, that's a golf ball representing the advanced artillery that allowed the Ottomans to finally breach the walls at Constantinople in 1453 and take control of the city and really bring an end to the Eastern Roman Empire. Students used both marbles and then golf balls, sort of indicating how superior artillery was really the paradigm shift. And you can see, I mean, they're really having a good time here. I wish my lectures garnered so much laughter and energy, but they don't often.
Artillery.
There's
Causing some damage.
There's students, of course, being active, tossing their artillery. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. That was one lesson, a 45-minute lesson, about 25 minutes of building, 10, 15 minutes of destruction, and then some cleanup. So I jumped ahead here. We did it last year in the snow. Here you can see the artillery line, students throwing snowballs at the walls and, of course, destroying the walls. And then I can refer to this experience and say, do you remember when we did that activity? And students can recall it much quicker, and then you can continue building content and understanding. Acting. So World War I is a big, complicated topic in history. And one of the ways to review, or one of the ways to introduce, or kind of how the war started, and then also how various actors and countries got involved at different points, is this analogy of World War I as a bar fight. I know it won't be appropriate for all students of all ages or all districts or all countries, but it is quite a funny and interesting way for students to review just some of the big events and causes of World War I, and just how complicated and messy the entangling alliances were. And you can narrate it as a teacher and have students act out certain roles as different countries, and your classroom turns into a bit of a mess with chairs and tables all everywhere. Not throwing anything, of course. Everything needs to be controlled, but it's pretty funny, and also one that generally has a pretty positive response from students. Medium effort examples, these might take a few more lessons, maybe one or two lessons, a little bit more prep. So I'll talk about QR code challenges, specifically scavenger hunts. These were inspired by Russell Tarr over at Active History. He has a lot of resources on QR code escape games and that sort of thing. And then I'll talk about some simulations. Teachers Pay Teachers is a good resource for simulations, but also if you're interested, you can reach out to me directly and I can share some resources with you. So this is a this is a satellite map of our campus, and each one of those letters corresponds to a different station where students would find a QR code like this. And as they go to these different stations, the QR code takes them to a document that helps them review some geographic, because I teach history and geography, some geographic content that we'd been studying. So this was a review, and it also incorporated some of the geographic concepts, of course, using different scale maps to navigate around. So you can even scan that if you'd like, if you want to pause this, just to see where it takes students, but it's just quite a simple document, and they have to answer a few questions about it. They had some more involved challenges as they were going around, but this was, I believe, a double lesson, so a 90-minute lesson. Here you can see them going around. And it doesn't have to be outside. You can absolutely do this inside if you're at an urban campus using a building map, which are often part of emergency procedures. So you'll probably have a building map near your sort of fire safety plan, or hopefully your school can provide that for you. Simulations are great. This is where students use concepts rather than simply learn about them. I've developed a few for the Indian Ocean trade and mercantilism, have really expanded on some simple ones that I found, and then the Great Leap Forward, which I developed from scratch. And they create an incentive in the classroom that students find quite intrinsically motivating. There's a bit of competition, but then you also have this experience that you can refer to and debrief, and of course connect it to the key understanding or learning outcomes that you'd like students to come away with. So this is the Indian Ocean trade. Students were bartering, trading different commodities. So we, pre-taught vocabulary like commodities, and they could trade commodities for currency, or commodities for commodities. And throughout the simulation, the value of those commodities changes. So they see how things like supply, demand, and also other things impact the value of commodities. For example, this is a colleague. He was getting a bit overwhelmed with the amount of groups at his table, so he closed his port. I didn't tell him to do this. I didn't tell him he could, but he has experience with simulations as well, and so that actually allowed us to then introduce this the concept of needing to smuggle if you wanted to trade with him, and introducing a bit of risk into the entire market system. Here, right before this, a student knocked off some cards that had porcelain, that represented porcelain sets. And so I made him pay for the porcelain sets because he knocked them off. It was totally an accident, but in real life, had he damaged things in transit, that would have affected, of course, his success to try and make a profit. There's a blog post on this simulation if you want to read more about it. Another one, I don't have pictures of it, but it's from Mercantilism, which is basically capitalism 1.0, the beta version of capitalism. And it's a bit of a wonky kind of historical period. And this the simulation that students engaged in, I can share with people, but what I want to speak about here is students in the simulation. Students rolled dice to see if they're to see if they were successful in their trades, and also there were the dice rolls impacted the value of their trades, um, and they were in different teams, and the teams in different pairs, and the pairs represented different companies. At one point, some students asked if they could combine teams because one of the teams was running out of money, and if so, what would that do to how that would improve um, their ability to succeed in the simulation. And I actually gave them an extra die to roll. They were able to combine their die so that their probability of success doubled. I didn't plan for this. The students asked if they could do it, and as the teacher, you need to be able to absorb these sorts of things you hadn't thought about into the scenario, but that also allowed us to debrief um, how that increased their probability of success. And that was one of the key bits of understanding from actually this topic, how joint stock companies were one of the ways Western European powers were able to really let this system flourish. And then there's some more large effort. This involves collaborating with administration and other teachers, maybe taking class time from other subjects. The topic of this one was the Long March, which was very much an important piece of propaganda in the for the Chinese Communist Party, which of course is still in charge in China, and the mythology around this event is really important for even today. Chairman Xi Jinping still refers to the Long March, and so there's part one, escape across the Yudu River. Here's the quote from the article we read that inspired this. It's a bit of a team building, bridge building activity where they had to build the bridge using various materials to escape from campus. Then we had to evade the Nationalist Army. I had other teachers who were hiding in the woods along our path, ambushing us. You can use, water guns or other, of course, not so dangerous things in that the nationalists can use in the ambush, or you can kind of play a bit of the students can have flags where it indicates if their flag gets taken, they get captured, something like that. This was when a plane flew by, and I shouted at the students to get down. It was totally, of course, random. You can see some of them into it, other ones just kind of looking around and laughing. The Luding River crossing. So this was perhaps one of the most sensationalized chapters of this story of the Long March. This is a river that was right next to campus. It's actually a glorified creek. It's only about 1.5 feet deep. You can see a safety line here. We had an outdoor company, some former colleagues come and provide safety and logistics to this. Students were also allowed to choose whether or not they took part in this. They challenged themselves for this part of the simulation, and only a few did, which is also true to history. According to the stories, there were a few that went across the Luding River and secured the far side for the army to cross. And I had these students, actually, I saw them a few years later, still, coming up to me and asking, "Oh, do you remember when we did that?" So the recall was even years down the line. And then there's us arriving at the end of the march. And so I think this requires teachers to focus on approach as much as content. As historians, we often get together with other historians to think about curriculum reviews, and we dump in more content and maybe shrink the time period that we talk about, when really our students, most of them aren't going to be historians, and we need to, I think, approach helps us. A fun and interesting approach helps students really look forward to coming to class and look forward to learning more, because if a good simulation also might require a bit of content understanding. So the better the students understand the content, the more successful they can be in the simulation. And we can sort of create that spark through these really interactive lessons and encourage students to fan the flame. because they'll really need the skills they learn in history to navigate the world, trying to understand what are reliable sources and understand the historical context for the present world. Um, Take chances if you have the opportunity with either time and a supportive administration. Take chances. These simulations, they'll develop, they season and they develop over time, and every time you do it you realize something different that you can tweak or add. um, and if anyone wants to start a conference aimed at sharing simulations where we actually get together and participate in them, please let me know, because that's something that's very much part of my professional goals. So thank you very much, and I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me through TCNJ, and I appreciate your time.